And that brings us to the end of Not Quite Prime Minister's Questions there, with George Osborne standing in for the Prime Minister, Hilary Benn representing Labour. It was rather quiet, quite civilised exchange between the front benches. Mr Benn concentrated on the problem of some young people going from this country to the Middle East to take part with ISIS in the wars that are going on there, and trying to get the Turkish authorities to stop it from going on, and what should be done in this country to try and discourage people from doing that. The prevent strategy is what it's usually called. There is, of course, a developing financial storm developing in Greece, and the Chancellor was there at the front bench, so naturally there wasn't a single question about Greece from the Mother of Parliaments on that issue. It's good to see them being far-reaching on these matters. We now know who the Labour deputy leadership candidates are. We got that while this was going on. Tom Watson, Caroline Flint, Angela Eagle, Ben Bradshaw and Stella Creasy. These are the deputy leadership candidates. They got enough nominations. Looking at Twitter, it was quite popular, the quality of the exchange between the two.
It was.
Is that reflected in your emails?
It is. I mean, it was a bit of a mixed bag in terms of response, but yes, generally they called it a sort of statesman-like exchange between the two gentlemen at the dispatch box. But within that, Ed Buxton from Gloucestershire said, bad start by George Osborne making a Bennite joke, overshadowing and diminishing Hilary Benn's important questions about the transit routes to Syria. Sometimes you have to forget the pre-written jokes. Chris Higgins, this is how PMQs should be done. Benn's calm delivery is more unnerving to Osborne and the braying has stopped. But Edward Wheatley said Hilary Benn demonstrated with his questions exactly how out of touch the Labour elite is with concerns of their supporters and why they lost the election. Damien Limack from Lancashire, wow, an excellent debut for both George Osborne and Hilary Benn, both asking and responding to questions in a truly mature and refreshing manner. What a breath of fresh air. Can these two do some more, please? We'll ask the Prime Minister. And this from Ellis King, blimey, Hilary Benn aiming foreign policy questions at our Chancellor led to nothing more than a slow, dull PMQs, where little was said.
So you can't win if it's if it's an argy-bargy shouting match, people complain. If you have something more civilised and measured, people complain.
You can't please everyone all the time,
no, well,
or even any of the time.
We know that on this programme. That first email, James, I thought it got something. I think Mr Benn's questions were well-informed, they were pertinent, they were serious questions. Kind of threw George Osborne at the beginning, did it not?
Yeah, it was a very clever strategy, because you go serious, so you go on something that is not George Osborne's comfort zone. So he can't get into his usual political territory. So essentially, what Hilary Benn did is he crowded out Osborne. It meant that Osborne couldn't get onto the economy, he couldn't get into the cut and thrust and the sort of the partisan politics. He had to stay rigidly onto the very, very serious subject of radicalisation, which not only, I think, tested George Osborne in a way that perhaps we haven't seen him tested before, because we know he can do the cut and thrust. I think it also showed, Hilary Benn. If I was a Labour member sitting on the back benches, I'd be sitting there thinking, why isn't this man one of the contenders in the list before us?
There were a few emails about that
this summer. I wouldn't surprise me.
No, there were a few saying he should be there.
And what it meant is that Osborne had to rely on the, shall we say, softer questioning from one or two Conservative backbenchers.
You mean the endless questions about jobs?
Well, your words, exactly. Lots of questions about the employment statistics today. And that allowed George Osborne to repeat one or two slogans that occasionally we hear. There's something about a plan that's sometimes
long term.
Yeah, it's never short term, is it? So that allowed the Chancellor to do that then. But from that point of view, I thought it was an interesting first challenge for the first secretary.
And on areas that were not his patch, he was a bit uncertain.
Well, what was interesting was that he got off to, I think some people might think that perhaps he might have shelved the joke about the Bennites.
The pre-written jokes, which it turned out not to be appropriate in the context.
Yes.
In a more knockabout exchange, it would have been okay.
Fine and appropriate like that. And I think that showed... that this is Prime Minister's questions, as we said before. It's a step up. The pressure is greater, and the desire to retreat to at least the comfort zone of a prepared line is something that it also gives you a couple more seconds thinking time to think, right, how do I get into this issue? Because he'll have been recalibrating. Because I doubt he will have expected a question on radicalisation.
And of course, none of us has ever told an inappropriate joke.
Well, we perhaps have, but
you don't have to answer that.
No, we've all told them, but not on the floor.
Not on network television on the floor of the House of Commons. So, Priti, just tell us how wonderful he was. Go on.
Well, look,
I mean, what, 11 out of 10, 12?
I think, Andrew, let's be clear. PMQs is a tough gig. There's no doubt about that. And I thought it was very clear, confident and commanding performance. It really was. And also, you know, because of the breadth of the questions, the range of the questions that come forward, I thought he answered the full range out, you know, not just the jobs questions that you
But isn't the
highlighted.
Chancellor, I mean, almost all government spending plans have to come before the Treasury.
So
And if any single, other than the Prime Minister, if any single cabinet member is across everything, it's got to be the Chancellor.
Absolutely, and he was. And I think he displayed that today quite with ease, actually, with ease.
Do you think now he's done that, he would give me an interview?
That I can't speak for
Could you
at
put a
all.
word in for us?
I'd happily speak to the Chancellor.
I hope it has some good. Your fellow MP, Ian Austin, has suggested that all the Labour candidates for leadership should have a go at Prime Minister's question, should do the Hilary Benn role between now and the summer recess.
I'm not entirely sure that would work, but I think it's an interesting suggestion.
Now who's thinking on their feet? Well, you don't want the idea, you don't like the idea of Jeremy Corbyn being on the front bench.
I think it would be the
PMQs?
first time that Jeremy Corbyn stood at the dispatch box. That certainly would be a first. I think it's right that Harriet generally does PMQs for us because it gives us that kind of consistency, and
she's
she
been
can
doing
ask
quite
about
well, has she?
different things. Yeah, and
Well,
I
she's
actually think,
experienced,
you know, I think we've got very interesting leadership and deputy leadership contests, more women than ever before. And one of the reasons I'm backing Liz Kendall is that I think he struggles, David Cameron, more so when he's up against a woman. And so I think that changes the dynamic. And I do think he finds it a bit more tricky.
Who are you backing
Harriet.
for the deputy?
I'm backing Caroline Flint. I would like us to have two women in the leadership, both as leader and deputy leader.
And the
I think
danger
that
is
would
you
send
could end up with two men.
That is a danger, and I hope that we don't end up with two men.
Did the Labour Party never give some thought to having, the way they do for American presidential elections, have a ticket? Because that way you could balance the ticket, couldn't you?
I mean, one possibility instead of doing that would be to stage the leadership contest so that
Or to
you
see
knew
who
what
wins
kind of
first.
leader you were going to get, and then you could elect.
Yeah, why didn't they do that?
discussed.
Because
I
who's deputy leader in the end of the day? It's not that important.
Well, I think it will be very
Or you
important
could wait.
in terms of rebuilding the party. We've got 5 years to rebuild the party. We've got to think about how we campaign differently. We've got to think about how we select our candidates differently, and probably don't select them 4 years before the next election, because frankly some of them gave up a lot of hard-earned money and houses, and also they changed their lives completely on the premise that they were hopefully going to win and then didn't. So it's tough for people. So we've got to think very carefully about how we do all of these things. And I think the deputy leader will have a big role in rebuilding the party from the grassroots up.
But you could have waited a few months, couldn't you?
Well, I mean, I don't know why we didn't stage it. I would have been in favour of doing that. Okay. It does have a cost implication, obviously.
George Osborne's stock has been in the ascendancy since the election. I mean, if the Tories had lost this election, his political career would have effectively been over, as well as the Prime Minister's. Now it's anything but over. More Conservatives now talk about him as a potential leadership contender, particularly if the economy continues to do well. But I would suggest that perhaps the reviews of today will not be, they'll be mixed.
I think there were some who will think this wasn't the format in which he hoped to have shined in the way he perhaps had hoped. But there were no major clangers.
No.
There were no major
Not that we yet
lines.
know of.
He, you know, if you remember, I can remember seeing William Hague's hands shake physically. Michael Heseltine's hands shaking physically at the dispatch box through the nerves of it, like that. He didn't display, you know, huge nervousness. You know, there might be one or two lines of the joke we mentioned. Perhaps he might have thought of it, might think again about. But
anybody in that situation is likely to make some mistakes.
But the point is that you have to be able to show you can do it. He can clearly do it, but that's not a reason to vote for somebody as that your leader. If, however, you show that you can't do it, then that might provide you a reason not to vote for them.
All right, James. Just about a month to go till the summer recess.
Yeah, and a lot of politics to come.
And a lot of politics
and
to
budgets.
come. And budgets.
Well, just
before
one.
we go.
Yeah, and the budget will be more important to George Osborne's future than
than today.
Yeah.
No. And I think my understanding is there's going to be a very big budget. He wasn't planning to, you don't have to nod because you know more, but originally he wasn't planning to do that much, but now he's actually going to do a lot.
We wouldn't expect you to comment.
Take advantage of Labour not having a leader was what I was told.
Yeah.
Okay, James, thank you. See you next week or the week after.
Thank you.
Week after that. The week after that. But
No,
not
then it's
the
the
week
end of
after that.